Little old gibbering Jackie with a rave from the grave and a breath from the pit. Plus some sounds from the mounds, dig my smashes from the ashes. Hear my righteous relics, you don't need psychedelics. Call you eavesdroppers and finger poppers, soul sisters and dial twisters, guys and gals and groovy grannies, listening in, turn up your tranny.
Britannia, Britannia, you are cool. Take a trip. Britons ever, ever, ever shall be. Hip, hippie, hippie.
Tony Blair has been going around saying, cool Britannia. Well, where's the copyright? Because actually that's Vivian's line.
I am the big shot.
From about 7 or 8 onwards, he always had a harmonica on him. Usually a harmonica in one pocket and a mouse in the other.
He used to travel with paintbrushes, bits of paper, ukuleles, mandolins, but, I mean, quite extraordinary sort of collection of bits and pieces.
I couldn't work with him because I used to laugh too much.
I think he wanted the world to be a bit more sensitive and not like him.
You could bank on him, absolutely bank on him, managing to do what you didn't want him to do.
Even the most successful or big-headed amongst us are aware when we're in the presence of a greater being, you know, and I think Viv was that greater being.
Who else could they be describing but the late, majestic and remarkable Vivian Stanshall? One of the most talented, profligate, bizarre, absurd, infuriating, unfathomable and magnificent Englishmen ever to draw breath. I'm Stephen Fry. Welcome to Big Shot, a journey through the canyons of Viv Stanshall's mind.
With big hungry tigers, table manners have no place. Dear, 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 no, dear, 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 no, dear, dear, oh, dear, no. After they have eaten you, they never say their grace. Dear, 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 no, dear, 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 no, dear, dear, oh, dear, no. Hunting tigers can be ripping fun. Like three blind mice, see the hunters run. Hunting tigers out in India. Out in India. Yeah.
I remember exactly when and where I was when I first heard that marvellous voice. A friend of mine at school was having what was called a study sale. He'd run out of money and had to raise some rather fast. And I walked out at the age of 13 with a big, square, yellow album called Tadpoles.
They bite, they scratch, they make an awful fuss. It's no use stroking them and saying puss, puss, puss. No hunting tigers out in India.
The first track was Hunting Tigers Out in India. Yeah. As I got to know more of Viv Stanshall, it was as if a whole new world had exploded in my head, a world where delight in language for the sake of its own textures, beauties and sounds, and where the absurd, the shocking and deeply English jostled about in mad jamboree.
Hunting tigers out in India. Out in India. Yeah. Hunting tigers out in India. Out in India. Yeah.
It was Viv's voice, I think, that delighted me more than anything. It had two registers, one light and dotty, with the timbre almost of a 1920s crooner, the other a Dundee cake of a voice, astoundingly deep, rich and fruity, capable of Elvis impersonations as well as great gutsy trombone blasts of larynx-lazy British sottery, to use a Stanshall-y sort of phrase. If you weren't a fan of the Bonzo Dog Band, and if not, why not, you may know Viv's voice from his introductions to the instruments on Mike Oldfield's Tubular Bells.
Spanish guitar and introducing acoustic guitar.
By the time in my 14th year I had encountered hunting tigers out in India, they'd actually dropped the doodah and had a big hit with I'm the Urban Spaceman. But that song was sung by the band's other leading light, pasticheur extraordinaire, Neil Innes.
Viv at his best. He could certainly put sort of wonderful images in the mind. And that's why he was so good at radio as well. I think he had a great way of playing with the imagination through his words. And what an imagination.
We present Mrs. Darley's Diary, an everyday story of bizarre people. I've been worried about Salvador lately. The Chinese anal violin meant such a lot to him. He hardly noticed that sheep brain I left out this morning. And the nightmares. He just doesn't seem to have them like he used to.
Here's John Peel.
I never knew him well, but was always enormously grateful for what he did. And I was always very grateful, too, for the stuff that John Walters managed to record for the programmes. But Walters was very good, thank God, and persevered with these things and ensured that they did actually happen. Because he was a wayward boy, as we know, and he needed somebody like Walters who could say to him, which most people didn't dare, Viv, that's a load of crap, and compel him to do it again. Walters was one of the few people who had the courage to say, actually, that really isn't any good, don't bother using that.
Peel wanted a holiday.
John Walters, radio producer, and so much more.
And so I suddenly thought, why don't I get Viv in from the Bonzos? He can just sit there, he's got a very good radio voice, and you never know whether he's taking the mickey out of the BBC or being himself, you couldn't tell. He'll do the links, and we'll just put the records in, and you talk between the records or the tapes. Oh boy, you don't work like that with Viv. I suddenly realised this was going to take forever, which it did.
I say, barman, hello. Hello, old Bean, over here, I'm important. Hello? Get on my way. Sorry.
Guernica.
What was that word you said, darling?
I said, Guernica.
Guernica. The sparkling Spanish wine-style Dago drink. Only 1.49 per party-size vat. Guernica! Olé!
Tell you what we'll do, mate. Let's do some ads. There were no ads at the time on radio. Radio Luxembourg, yes, but Capital hadn't started, or any of the commercial stations, LBC and so on. But he'd been in a chemist's shop, and he had very little patience with the general public. Good morning, Mrs. So-and-so. Well, that was not Viv's way of talking. He'd be seething. So he was behind a chap who was in front of him. And the chap then said to the chemist, he said, he said, excuse me, he said, but my wife and I, we want to go on a picnic, but I always find as soon as you start to get things out, the sandwiches and so on, and cakes, he said, we've always got like wasps and things coming round our heads, you know. And he said, do you have anything that I can get rid of wasps with? And the bloke, Viv's rolling his eyes, oh, come on, you silly sod, get on with it. But then the bloke said, yes, I believe I have, sir, just under here. And he pulled out a can of spray of, which is a product you can still get, I believe, waspies. And so Viv steps up and says, I'm thinking of going on safari to Kenya. He said, but I have this great fear of lying in the tent at night and being trampled by, rhinoceroses or something like that come charging around. He said, do you have any sort of spray that will get rid of it? Instead of the bloke saying, yeah, I know, you heard the last bloke. The bloke said, I can give you an all-purpose animal spray. Viv, oh, that's it, So he came in and he said, let's do some sprays, you see, and so he first came up with Repellifant. And it was something like, do you suffer from pachyderm problems? Should you use Repellifant? Shh! Watch those big fellas pack their trunks and go. And then I think he said something like, as used by members of the royal family.
Thinking of getting away this year? Going abroad? Mallorca, maybe, Gay Paris, or perhaps somewhere more adventurous. Who knows what untold dangers lurk in the tall grass? Come closer, gang. I want to put you onto a good thing. Concerned about rhinos? Ever experience an unpleasant tickling at the base of your spine? A feeling that rhinos are near. It's uncanny, isn't it? The way they seem to sense your weakness, know almost instinctively of your inner fears. Well, relax. It's all been taken care of. Yes, taken care of with Rhino. Yes, Rhino, the 24-hour rhinoceros repellent. So why take risks? Say no to rhinos with Rhino, right? No!
I suggested, and I didn't think it was a bad one, but I'd suggested it, so he couldn't do it, you see. And that was the German dog repellent, K9. But no, he said, no, I didn't really fancy that one. And I thought, I should have shut up about that. If he'd have thought of it, we'd have done it. But the crucial one came almost at the end. He came into the office and just said, I just had a great inspiration. He said, how we can do the very last one, the last ad. It's for chaps who go out onto the Essex marshes and they're plagued by wild birds flapping around. So I said, yeah, what's it called? He said, duck off. And I said, oh dear, Viv, now, come. It's Saturday afternoon, we've got millions of listeners. Some parent is bound to say, my child heard this, and he's going around the house telling people to duck off. You know, so I did go and see the famous Mark White, a slightly military sort of chap with a moustache. And he said, well, we're all men of the world, John. Yeah, I could see what you mean there. The trouble is there's no ambiguity there, is there? We can't say, there's a separate meaning. It's just duck off. Then he said, I'll tell you what. I'll let you put it out. I'll let you have it. If you change it to Drake off. And Viv had to admit when I got back down to the office that we had met our match there with the old BBC.
The British brainwashing controller presents Colonel Knut and Lemmy in Breath from the Pit, a serial specially written for radio in 4 parts. Episode 2, A Tickler for Colonel Knut.
He insisted he also wanted a serial, like Dick Barton's Special Agent, and he insisted on having the Colonel Knut. I say no more.
Great guns, the Scorpion, by all that's loathsome. He's had a bit of reupholstery on his boat race, but I'd know that beastly breath anywhere. My dear Knut, I know that you are awake. Why, only a few Augenblicks ago I had the pleasure of seeing you eat your own sock like an animal. So, you insist on trying my patience too far. Very well. Horace, bite him deep. Oh! Okay. All right, you black-hearted squid, I'm awake, so what? And what filthy nest of vipers' spawn conjured you? No, my colonel, my little pantomime brings you to me. Pantomime, eh? So you planned it all. Why, if I went pinioned to the floor with these strips of sticky tape of a well-known proprietary brand, Save your breath, colonel. Soon you will need every gasp. What, you devil? We're blowing up balloons. I like balloons. Or is it blow football, eh? I'm good at that. You can't frighten me. I'm wearing Thompsons. Thompsons? Of course. The Thompson Intrepid trouser. For the chap who likes to do 2 things at once. 2 things? Come closer. I wonder if you've noticed the concealed dual-purpose zip. Indemne. I'm a dead duck if this wheeze doesn't come off. You see, Thompsons invert to make an attractive balaclava helmet to fit a big rabbit or a useful shovel. Like these trousers I'm wearing myself. You unspeakable swine! Those are my easy breezes. Yes. Give them back to me immediately. Strip a chap to his sub-trousers, would you? Why, I'm quite powerless. I'm jolly cold around the old privates without them. I won't stand up without a towel. I never would. Stop spitting, blast you. Silence, Colonel. Control yourself. Believe me, you are impeccably dressed for tonight's entertainment. Crab, come here.
Yes, master.
Crab.
Sorry, master. I was eating a worm.
Well, put it down. Good grief, a talking gorilla. I wonder if he'd play his bass guitar, make a fortune with the right management. Crab, I want you to release the Colonel and bring him to me in the ping-pong room.
He knew how these things went, and they always had a straight guy, public school sort of guy, but he also had a likeable Cockney assistant.
Meanwhile, desperate to rescue his Führer, likeable Lemmy has returned to the house with 10 strong men.
He said, I'll get Keith Miller to come in and do that. He thinks I'm wonderful. He'll come in and love to be on the radio. And so he got Keith to come in to play the part of Lemmy.
Hello, there's a blinking light on upstairs. Here, Crusher. give us an hand with this gorilla suit.
Right, here you go.
Yeah.
I mean, cool, blimey, Trash's a bit on a tight shirt, isn't he?
Hey, what's he look like?
Yeah, go on, no. Yeah, and see, look, if they spot me, they'll think I'm on their side, eh? Yeah, right, now. You geezers, get down behind that rody-me blinking dendron bush and keep your heads down. Somewhere up there, all right. I can hear the voices. And what's that other noise? Horrible. Ooh, sounds like eyeballs popping out.
Vivian's brain was quite extraordinary.
Philippa Clare, manager.
But he was sort of shrapnelled out. He always was so busy doing so many things at the same time. I think he found it difficult to concentrate on one thing at a time.
He was fine for the first 2 weeks, seemed to be fine. He then started to drink with quite an enthusiasm, because he'd taken on really more than he knew how to handle. Deadlines, Viv didn't recognise deadlines, you see. I said, but Viv, it's going out this Saturday. And it got right to almost the last day before the last one went out. And we still hadn't got the final episode of the Colonel and Lemmy. I said, look, we've got to do it this Friday. It goes out on Saturday. Now, Keith turned up in time, though. It was a morning. He still turned up, sober, straight. About 10 o'clock in the morning. 2 hours passed. I'm sitting in the booth with my head in my hands thinking, oh, God, we've got to finish this serial. It's a serial. We can't just put out nothing. People are waiting to find out what happens about the gorillas. So then I heard a door go in the studio. The mics were all on. I could hear somebody walking across and a clink of bottles. And round in front of the glass came this figure in this ludicrous checky jacket and holding a bag with obviously bottles in it and a ukulele poking out of it. And so it was Viv with the... Sorry I'm late, mate. I'm so sorry I'm late. He said, I've been driving around London in a taxi trying to find an off licence that'll take a check. And I thought, well, there we are. But no, I said, don't worry about it, Viv. We still have an hour. Just give Keith the script. And then he said, hang on, mate. I've got to write it first. And you thought, the way he said it, it was my fault. Hang on, mate. I've got to write it first. But that was, Viv, I'm afraid if you wanted to use him, you had to use him on those terms. There's nothing else you could do about it.
Keith Moon was Viv's collaborator outside as well as inside the studio. Musician Pete Moss.
He used to set up Keith Moon as a little working-class Cockney chappie in an Oxford Street store. And he used to go in and say in his best upper-class voice, I want a pair of very strong trousers. And the assistant used to say, oh, strong trousers, sir? Yes, these are very strong. He said, no, they've got to be extra strong trousers. And because Vivian could pull this type of thing off with a straight face better than anybody I ever knew. So the assistant would say, sir, I assure you, these are very, very strong trousers. He said, well, can we test them? So, of course, Keith is lurking in the sidelines there, and he says, you, chappie, come here. You get hold of one leg, and he get hold of the other one. He says, now pull. And, of course, inevitably, they used to pull like mad. They used to rip these brand-new trousers apart in the middle of the store, and the man is going to go mad. He's about to call the police. And unbeknownst, Vivian has paid a one-legged actor to come into the store at that moment and say, just what I needed, I'll take both.
Viv could get away with anything.
Neil Innes again.
I remember we came out of a curry house in Leeds, and he saw this little old lady with one of those shopping baskets on wheels. And we were just walking along and said, where's Viv? And turned around, and he dropped down on one knee and was singing to this woman. And he sang One Alone from the Desert Song all the way through. And instead of this woman whacking him with her handbag, as anybody should, she listened to it all the way through, smiling, and she said, oh, thanks very much, love. And said, not at all, you're welcome, my dear. He had this gift of doing that.
He was always the sort of person who had to be the centre of attention.
Mark Stanshall, Viv's younger brother.
One of the great things that you could find in jumble sales and junk shops then were complete Victorian outfits, frock coats and wonderful waistcoats and spats and things like that, which he took to with great aplomb when he was about 17 or 18. Could often be seen striding down Southend High Street in full Dickensian bloom. And as such, I think the police rather marked him out because he was constantly being arrested for either drunk and disorderly or singing selections from Gilbert and Sullivan down there, normally fuelled with scrumpy. But the centre of attention he just had to be. And jumble sales and, in fact, junk shops in the 50s and the early 60s were wonderful things. You could buy smashing musical instruments there. I distinctly remember horn gramophones being 17 and 6 if you wanted the papier-mâché horn, and 25 bob for the brass horn, and 78 records, so there was sort of music all around. And I hadn't quite got into the pop and the rock and roll, because I think we both rather skipped that and went straight through into the Alberts, and more sort of syncopated jazz than anything else.
We all hunted for records, these 78s, and found, various silly things that we learnt up as the repertoire.
There's a farm called Misery, but of that we'll have none, because we know of one that's always lots of fun. And this one's name is Jollity. Believe me, folks, it's great, for everything sings out to us as we go through the gate. All the little pigs, they grunt and howl, the cats meow, the dogs bow wow, everybody makes a row down on Jollity Farm.
Both my parents greeted his forming a band with dismay. I thought it was rather good news. See, things in the early 60s were so emergent, and Bonzos, I think, were so totally new in their approach and humour to the whole thing, that they were bound really to get noticed. But I don't think they ever made any money because there was always too many of them. They were always too drunk.
We first met in a big Irish pub in South London, the New Cross Arms, and he came because he was quite plump in those days. And he was wearing Billy Bunter check trousers and a Victorian frock coat, black coat tails, horrible little oval, violet tinted pince-nez glasses. He had a euphonium under his arm and large rubber false ears. And I thought, well, this is an interesting character. And, they were looking for a piano player. So I said, well, yeah, I like the sound of that. It was just loony. It was a wonderful way of letting off steam for art students, I don't know whether you'd call it humour, but it was certainly different. And at one stage, the Bonzos were playing 5 pubs a week in London. It built up a very big following. But lots of people used to come down and see us, mostly at the Tiger's Head in Catford. And Kenny Ball's brother-in-law, a man called Reg Tracy, thought that there was a future for us. And in the Easter holidays before our final year, we went up to Newcastle and South Shields and played 2 clubs a night for a week, and the upshot of that was a booking for 6 weeks in the summer after we'd finished college. And really, it just sort of took off from there. I mean, no one planned it. It just sort of happened. But Viv went up to the Edinburgh Festival and worked with Lindsay Kemp. And when he came back, he was a changed person. He'd lost all the chubbiness, and he now became aesthetic Vivian Stanshall. And in fact, I think he he lifted one of Lindsay's routine, the striptease artist, taking the bra off and juggling enormous imaginary boobs. And this was a hoot, you see. I mean, this went down terribly well in the pubs, on top of the drinking music. And once he'd started doing that and assuming the role of frontman, the band tended to take a vocal direction.
Hi there, nice to be with you. Happy you could stick around. Like to introduce Legs Larry Smith, drums. And Sam Spoon's rhythm pole. And Vernon Dudley Bohay Noel bass guitar. And Neil Innes piano. Come in, Rodney Slater alto saxophone. With Roger Ruskin Spear on tenor sax. Hi, Vivian Stanshall trumpet. Big hello to Big John Wayne xylophone. And Robert Morley guitar. Billy Butlin spoons. And looking very relaxed, Adolf Hitler on vibes. Nice. Princess Anne on sousaphone. Introducing Liberace clarinet. With Garnet Ted Armstrong on vocals. Lord Snooty and his pals tap dancing. In the groove with Harold Wilson violin. And Franklin McCormack on harmonica. Over there, Eric Clapton ukulele. Hi, Eric. What a team, Zebra Kid and Horace Batchelor on percussion. And a great favorite and a wonderful performer, all of us here, J. Arthur Rank on gong.
It was United Artists, I think. first record company. Again, it was Mr. Reg Tracy who did the first deal. But again, we didn't take it seriously. I mean, we were having too much fun to sort of look at what we were getting into. But we went to Abbey Road and recorded My Brother Makes the Noises for the Talkies. That was our first single.
What's all that noise about?
Why, don't you know that's only my brother is practicing?
My brother makes the noises for the talkies. There's not a single noise that he can't do. If you've forgotten what a parrot's squawk is, I'll run and illustrate that noise for you. He does the steam escaping from liners leaving dock. He'll fake a razor scraping or else a cuckoo clock. My brother makes the noises for the talkies. There's not a single noise that he can't do.
This is what I hear when I'm in bed. A bang, a rattle, like thunder overhead. Then cats meow and dogs bow wow. The only sleep I'll get is when I'm dead. A shot goes crack, a gale starts blowing, a duck goes crack, a cock starts crowing. So you may think I'm kidding you, yet what I say is true. Just listen, I'll explain to you.
When I saw them, you could tell that there was something very creative about it and very distinct. He always maintained that an awful lot of bands used to come in and actually take notes during his performance and sort of pinch his ideas.
One of our first lessons of show business was, our trumpeter then was Bob Kerr. Great player and a fun guy. But he was friends with Jeff Stevens, who'd made Winchester Cathedral with session men. And he knew Bob, so he rang Bob up saying, look, what am I going to do? You know, Winchester Cathedral's a hit. I've got no band to promote it. So Bob, flushed with excitement, came to the rest of us in our dig saying, we can be the new vaudeville band. And we said, you know, certainly not. No way, you know. So Bob sort of said, well, I couldn't understand this. So we said, well, go, you go and do it then if you want to. And sort of go, never darken our towels again kind of thing. But the next thing on top of the pops was the new vaudeville band with a singer looking exactly like Viv in a sort of lame suit. All the musicians wearing the kind of suits we were wearing with two-tone shoes. They'd even nicked the cut-out comic speaking balloons, which we made out of cardboard, you know, with a fret saw and painted white, and then wrote sort of, wow, I'm really expressing myself, to hold over somebody's head while they did a saxophone solo. There was the entire image. And for the next few weeks, people were saying to us, hey, you're like that new vaudeville band. And that's when, I think, Legs Larry Smith said, well, he'd always been sort of arguing for doing some more modern material, so we all said, right, now we start writing our own stuff. And so that's what we did.
In the canyons of your mind, I will wander through your brain to the ventricles of your heart, my dear. I'm in love with you again. Cross the mountains of your chest, I will stick a Union Jack to the forest of your cheek, through the holes in your string bag.
Everyone thinks it's Viv. Well, that's quite right, because Viv was the front man. You know, this was the best way of us presenting the staff. And, okay, we ought to have a guitar solo. You know, well, let's make it a really bad one, I said. The music industry has got it closest to having a sense of humour in those days, because I remember a magazine called Beat Instrumental made me Guitarist of the Month because of that solo. So the lyric is mainly Viv, but I mean the production and the basic chord structure and whatnot, I suppose it's my input. I was reluctantly the one that had to be the one that sort of organised these things. None of us really wanted to make a pop single. We were getting pressure from record company and management, to sort of play the game, because we were earning as much as any band in the charts, so we didn't see the point in joining the charts. The charts have always been sort of inherently funny, to Bonzo mentality anyway. Not only that, our management at the time used to say, 3 hours, that's all you need to make a track. We haven't finished yet, we would say. No, 3 hours, that's all you need. So Viv was talking to Paul McCartney down the Speakeasy, I think, and Paul said, well, I'll come along and produce it. This was wonderful. We could go back to management then and say, well, actually, we don't want you to produce this. And it's a wonderful moment where they said, oh, yes, and who do you think you're going to get there?
I'm the urban spaceman, baby. I've got speed. I've got everything I need. I'm the urban spaceman, baby. I can fly. I'm a supersonic guy. I don't need pleasure, I don't feel pain. If you were to knock me down, I'd just get up again. I'm the urban spaceman, baby, I'm making out. I'm all about.
So Paul came along, and he was used to spending, however long they wanted. And the whole thing took 8.5 hours, including, when Viv at the end said, I think I'd like to play my garden hose. 12-foot length of garden hose with a trumpet mouthpiece, and he circled this around his head ferociously and blowing with all his might. And the engineer said, no, we can't possibly record that thing. Paul says, yeah, you can, just put a microphone in each corner. And that took another 20 minutes. And it made the noise you can now hear on the end of Urban Spaceman. I mean, we did try and muck it up. The Bonzos didn't really last longer than about 5 years. But it stopped being fun in America, actually. We sort of realised that, we were being used. We felt a bit like sort of Brussels sprouts at Christmas time or something. We were in season and we were being flogged as hard as we could. And when Roger Spears' wife, Sue, had a miscarriage, and they didn't even bother to tell him. They were all in America, so he couldn't even phone up and say, are you okay? And so that's all we needed to really bond and say, let's sod them. We're going home. And we decided, that let's call it a day while it's still, inventive and fresh. But we were still actually signed together on a record label. We realised the situation, we couldn't actually pursue our own careers. So we got together and made Let's Make Up and Be Friendly. And that, of course, had we not done it, we wouldn't have seen the embryonic Sir Henry at Rawlinson End.
Ah, Sir Henry at Rawlinson End. I can still recite it by heart. Old Mrs. McAvoy stood at table straight back to cadaverous, and bucolic, jolly Sir Henry, coattails thrown up in front of the fire, expounding his interminable exploits before the blaze.
You see, the natives said in their novels that if a chap's soul was pure, then the snake bite wouldn't harm him. Poor old Hargreaves died almost immediately. Horrible agony. I was going to tell you something about the big fella. You see, Bunny and I went off into the bush after him. Did we find him? By God, we found him. I could see the rascal's eyes gleaming like coals. Then he was coming at me through the undergrowth, big as a tank, and a pair of tusks on him sharp as sickles. You've probably seen him up in the study, use them for defacing Reader's Digest these days. Well, rifle jammed, bloody useless. Bunny panicked, took off like a fox, little fool. Bearers scattered. What would I blame him? What we'd seen back in the clearing was enough to turn any man's liver. Then he was on me, snapping and stabbing at my legs. I sidestepped neat as a blasted pansy and let go at the blighter with eyes clenched and fists blazing. Biff wallop. I'm terribly sorry, darling. It was splattered all over my trousers. I think I'll be toddling off now.
They were walking towards a part of the hall I knew to be unsafe. It was no good. Whatever the cost, I had to warn them.
Watch out for that loose floorboard,
I shouted, then wished I hadn't. They both turned to glare at me. Then the rotten wood gave way, and frozen, they disappeared into the cellar. With an agility that surprised me, I sprang from my hiding place and peered into the hole.
Maureen was headfirst in a barrel of dilled pickles, struggling furiously. I knew she carried a snorkel in her handbag, but would she use it? Here's John Walters again.
Viv, after the Bonzos, kept calling me and wanting to come on the Peel show, but frankly he had nothing he could do. He'd he'd get a band together, Big Grunt was one of them, I can't remember all the others, but then he'd ring round all these mates, Stevie Winwood and people who'd do him a favour, because people loved him, really, you know, I mean, it's quite amazing. And they'd turn up, then they'd have to rehearse them, and they weren't great songs. So eventually I said, I'll tell you what, I've heard this thing, Sir Henry at Rawlinson End. Oh, yes, that's easy. I just scribble it, you know, and you think of a few spoofs on that sort of Edwardian. I said, well, fine, write another one, and we will put it out. But if you haven't got it, and I haven't seen it, you can't do it. So I really had got him then. He'd do the usual thing. I'd call him and say, now, will the studio still okay next Thursday? Ah! You know what's happened, mate? I gave it to this girl I hardly knew, and she was going to get it photocopied, and she'd just not come back. I don't know where she is. I had to get hold of her. And he'd say anything like that. But eventually I said, if you do that, we're going to get a lot of response. And so, of course, he insisted that he got to put songs in it, and he got to have the Stevie Winwoods and all these people turning up. And so it didn't get any better from that point of view. So old Sir Henry had to have a song, or Mrs. Doodah had to have a song in the piece. I thought, oh, God, all right. He won eventually. But people would ring up the next day, very often people who didn't obviously listen to John Peel and had no idea who this chap was, but they thought it was wonderful.
I remember sort of like Vivian coming up to me and saying, oh, my dear, you know all these thesps.
Philippa Clare.
And I want to do this film of Henry, so he said, you know Patrick McGee. Will you introduce me? And I went, oh, God. Then he said, will you now introduce me to Trevor Howard? And I said, well, why don't we get the lot? Shall we have Oliver Reed? Why don't we go for whole hog? And then it just developed and developed and developed, and then eventually went into this kind of very sort of esoteric movie.
The next thing, he was making a film. Well, he wasn't making it. He was eventually banned from the set, I'm told. You know, it just got too much, and there's a very short cameo appearance of him in the film.
Sir Henry at Rawlinson End, it was a never-ending saga.
Pete Moss.
And he's in a barbershop quartet we need to sing this song about Rennie Magritte called Strike Me a Pinky. And so in the end there were three of us, because it had to be with Vivian, a quartet had to be three. And we had to stand on a punt in the middle of Nebworth Lake. And he was so drunk out there, and we were trying to sing this song, and he was shouting at us all the time. And it was like, we couldn't stop laughing. And I think that they had a hard time with him on that film. Again,
he let me down, of course. I'd say, look, here's a great thing. We'll have Christmas at Rawlinson End and go right the way through Christmas Eve. He did it. It was all right, but he was well under the influence of drink when he did it. Oh, Sir Henry, and people, I think, thought he was putting on, but in fact, he talked like that anyway at that time, and you just thought, oh, God, what can we do? And there was nothing you could do.
Viv's unpredictable behaviour put a strain on other relationships, among them his musical partnership with Neil Innes.
We thought about, working together again, as songwriters and getting in, a different crowd of musicians. But I think Viv still wanted to sort of experiment, with his own kind of demons and forces of creativity, and I certainly didn't want to be working with an unpredictable, volatile genius.
And he was becoming slightly more and more difficult.
Mark Stanshall.
As he plunged himself into a Valium, and his drinking, of course, was making him more and more difficult. And he was always under that sort of tortured genius syndrome.
I said, enough, when he used to get out of order. I said, you're fired. He went, don't you understand, Porky? He said, managers don't fire their artists. Artists fire their managers. So, we carried on like that. We had a good relationship. He was a nightmare at times, but other times he could be wonderful and very amusing and a lot of fun. See, he actually went into treatment and got himself together, and he would come in absolutely looking wonderful, with sort of the Panama and the beautiful suit and the cravat and hello, my dear.
He had a physical presence. He could walk on stage and this man is dangerous. You've got to watch him because you just don't know what he's going to do.
We used to have this little routine, the broken record routine, where the needle sticks. We used to go dunga 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 dunga. We used to keep going like that. And Vivian stopped, looked up, and his idea was he used to jump off the stage, look at the audience like that, and then kick the stage. And as he jerked the stage, because we'd all carry on. A very funny routine. It's very, 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 very clever. Well, of course, he didn't realise that wherever we were in Birmingham, I can't remember where it was, the stage was about 7 or 8 feet high, and he fell off this stage. And he fell so badly. What we didn't realise at the time but discovered afterwards, the muscle in his knee had ripped a piece of bone out of his shin. And he fell across the first 3 people in the first row screaming with agony. And we could see that he wasn't going to get back up, and we're still stuck. And I'm shouting to the roadies, get somebody out there, he's fallen over and hurt himself, and nobody believes us because it's Vivian. And Dick Parry has said over the mic, we're still playing. Talk about discipline. We're still playing. And Dick Parry said, ladies and gentlemen, this is a serious announcement. Is there a doctor in the house? But this is Bonzo time. And everybody stood up and cheered. But he had some wonderful things, and one of the little things we used to stand there was all of us when we were on tour in the early days, we all had a mic each, and we used to start. And we used to go...
It will come to pass. A great tempest, and ocean-going liners will be tossed like matchboxes in the boiling ferment. Then the poor white bodies of the drowned will carpet the shores of the sea, while on the land, earthquakes of such terrifying effect that graves will crack and oaks uproot, and rivers flow uphill in fear. The air will shock with the shrieks of the damned, while the stink of the dead's gangrene and the filth of the cities darken the skies with foul pestilential effluvia.
But over the rest of the country, there will be light showers with some sunny spells.
He had some great ideas. And he had this thing that he said he wanted to write songs and tunes that everybody could whistle. How can I put this nicely? He wasn't a great conventional musician, but he did love music. So therefore, he used to have the front to just phone them up and say, come and play.
The whole music business then that people forget about is that it was very small. And, you know, especially nowadays, if somebody goes, gosh, did you really know so-and-so? Well, everybody knew everybody. If you were in the music business, I mean, there was not that many bands. And it was all new, and nobody really knew what they were doing. Which is why people like Clapton, etc., 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 would be involved, because everybody knew everybody.
I rode along work to the end of the line. I asked Tin Man if he'd tell me the time. He took off his hat and he took off his pen. He took off Max 5 grades, here's what he said. You take first right and second left. The man in the moon says, how's your check? The man in the sun says, have another one. So we're all tagged up and singing a song. Cannibal chief, shoot camembert cheese, cause chewing keeps them cheeky. Big fat Fred takes fur to his head, cause he thinks fur makes him freaky. Benjamin Bland and his bugle band, oh, the Blues Bound Weekly. How many pies can the faultless boys on tour, cause if she pleases?
The memorably titled Labiodental Fricative, with Eric Clapton guesting on guitar.
He was always loved by the rock and rollers. I mean, I think it's because he was so eccentric. And Ark of a Diver, for example, he wrote the lyrics to that for Steve Winwood. You know, and he's done lots and lots of different things. I suppose in a way he was a sort of Renaissance man, but if he'd been a different personality, maybe he wouldn't have done all that stuff. We just don't know.
There was this strange attraction. And so therefore, all these musicians used to just love the eccentricity of playing with it.
He'd get his whole slew of weird instruments out from, you know, hose pipes and legs and all that kind of thing.
Steve Winwood.
But I think when he worked on more of his serious stuff, perhaps, with me either for Traffic or on my projects, he would often just concentrate on the words, or the intelligence, as he used to call it. I very much worked on the melodic side and he on the lyrics, but we did actually work together, and I would sing it through and we'd talk about what the song was about and try different lyrics and change the melodies together. I mean, there definitely was interaction. It wasn't one of these, what I call, you know, songwriting by post kind of thing, which can be successful and can work well, but Viv and I used to work together quite closely. He would come down to my house and we'd just get together for just, I suppose, socially, although we never thought of it as being social in those days. But his imagery was very strong, and that was also what interested me about music as well, the way it's possible to create strong images. And certainly I think that Ark of a Diver was one of his greatest lyrics.
Until yesterday, till I quite got stopped.
The first time I met Viv Stanshall, he got extremely drunk by consuming 2 bottles of aquavit in a Swedish restaurant in Stoke Newington. He came back to my room, played the piano for an hour, rather extraordinary, choosing Beethoven's Pathetique Sonata, which he was experimenting with. "I love the diminished seventh," he said to me. And at some point he raised the issue of his great new musical, Stinkfoot, in which he was to play God. I'm not a deeply charitable man, but I know, and I have always known, that I owed Viv Stanshall everything at that point that I had in the 80s. This was a burgeoning sort of career and a growing reputation as someone who was just a little bit like a miniature version, unworthy to wash his shadow in which I strode unconfidently. But to have met him was enough. And the opportunity to put some money into Stinkfoot was, of course, irresistible. It was the very least I owed this remarkable man.
One of the strangest things that ever happened, I got asked to go down to have a look at Stinkfoot, which was down at Bristol, and it was total chaos down there, and he was putting this whole thing on, and they needed an overture, and he got this band, and he got street buskers. He just walked around Bristol, pulling street buskers, come and play with me. And we had about 9 of these musicians. He says, "There you go, there's your band." He said, "I want an overture." And that was about 12 midday, and we had to have it by 8 o'clock in the evening. And the weird thing was, it worked. And if I can say this about Vivian, the one thing, because I had the classical background originally, and then I came into rock and roll for other things, because I could read and do all that bit, I learnt through Vivian that wasn't all there was.
He was still drinking and popping the odd Valium. He looked as if about 4 layers of skin had been stripped off him. He always had that slightly sort of raw onion skin, very pink and blotchy. So I popped a bit of money in, and his voice as God still rings in my head from time to time. "Hello, old onion." But despite such flashes of brilliance, Viv's demons were never far away.
He was never overweight, and he just became thinner and thinner, and his hair fell out. And he wasn't a person who took advice kindly, because he always thought he was that bit clever, I suppose. But I went to visit him once or twice in hospitals here and there, and he said to me from one of his bedsides, "How shall I pay for all this?" I said, "I don't know. Do you care?" He said, "Not really." So I said, "Well, why don't you get a job teaching?" He said, "And become normal."
You think you're normal? Yes, quite normal. Okay, here comes one.
Say.
Well, it's not for me to deter, really, is it? I mean, it's for a psychiatrist to deter these things, isn't it?
They like their food, and they are very nice people.
Oh, it's all right, isn't it?
Smart. Short back inside.
It is unusual. Well, it's like a rabbit. He's got a head on him like a rabbit.
I wouldn't like to say he was bad at anything other than living in the sort of parameters of a so-called normal world. He was always on that edge.
Well, Dave settled down eventually and got a normal job away from the manor. Mary had a kipper in the oven, but we caught it just in time. The Johnsons redecorated the bathroom this week. I suppose I'll get round to it. And if you are cross-eyed, be careful crossing the road. Remember, look straight ahead, then straight ahead, then straight ahead again.
Even though he was kind of very energetic and imaginative and confidence-boosting character, I think basically he was incredibly sensitive. I mean, the odd boy who doesn't like sport, that says a lot about Viv's inner self.
Let's go back to your childhood, 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 childhood.
The old boy always had a very special place in my heart as well, partly because The name of the odd boy, it turns out, is in fact Stephen, who's not feeling a bit well. He's had a cold and he's still feeling a bit snotty, as his mother writes in a letter to the schoolmaster, who replies, "Give him a nice cold shower." And I was very much the odd boy who didn't like sport, and I wanted to lie in the long grass with a limp, purple-bound volume of Mallarmé, while the centrefold called me an imbecile. It's an odd boy who doesn't like sport. That was my whole childhood, really, so it spoke very deeply to me.
Dear Mr. Potson, would you kindly excuse Stephen from games today? He has had a nasty cold over the weekend and still has headaches and feels a bit snotty. I don't feel he should be outside with a rougher type of boy, as he's a little delicate. Hoping you will understand, yours sincerely, Nellie Maynard, Miss. Give him a nice cold shower.
Masculine sport, equips a young man for society. Yes, sports and that are very good sport. It's an old boy who doesn't like sport.
He always was terribly, terribly, terribly nervous and very insecure, and he'd have panic attacks. And towards the end of his life, I mean, he was always very nervous about performing. He always got into a terrible state, which is such a shame, because if you'd only just realised he was all right, I think he would have had a much happier time and actually done a lot more stuff that he wanted to do.
I'd seen Viv on and off over the years.
Poet Brian Patten.
But we really got together in a group called Grimm's, which was a rather manic multimedia group that did a lot of touring. And I remember one of the last tours, Viv was particularly chaotic, and in one of his quiet moments he said he knew that the way he was living was getting in the way of the incredible work his imagination was flinging out at him.
If a person's on a self-destruct course, I don't think there's much you can do about it. And he definitely was towards the end. He was on that self-destruct course. He came back on a Sunday morning very, very depressed, got in bed with a glass of brandy and a cigarette, and apparently that's when it happened. The brandy spilt over his chest, and he fell asleep, and that's when it happened.
We assume he fell asleep with the cigarette. He'd done it many times. His chest was sort of peppered with cigarette burns where he'd passed out. It was an accident really waiting to happen. He'd pushed himself so long, so hard, you know. The end came, I suppose, as a bit of a shock, but not a surprise, really.
The day after Viv died, a mutual friend of ours, Richard Adams, received a bunch of drawings and poems in the mail. And Viv must have put them in the post the day before he died, or even on the actual day he did die. I guess if Viv hadn't have posted the work, it would have been lost in the fire that killed him. And the manuscript Richard received was full of wonderful, surreal stuff like Willem de Kooning is rudely detuning a banjo he plucks with a duck. And, you know, a lot of off-the-wall stuff. But there was another tragic tone in the poems, and one in particular I thought was really poignant, and, well, it was called With My Mouth Turned Down for the Night. Great God, I don't want to get old. Not in the way that old folks do. Feel my mouth thin in disapproval. Wake up to I told you so's. Hate that woman beside me. Hate myself because I hate. Looking back with nothing to dream about. Just today, and all that's left of looking back. With my mouth turned down for the night.
I suppose he's left works that you can play time and time again because there's always a different word you might discover or a different Vivianism in the interpretation. I mean, who on earth could write another song called My Pink Heart for the Train Pipe? Few people, indeed.
My pink heart of the brain pipe, separates next door from me. My pink heart of the brain pipe, oh mama, belongs to me.
Roger's bass saxophone solo as promised.
This guy from, I think, Warner Brothers, I think he got this album out, or the Rolling Stone was launching or something. And he took him round on a promotional trot round London. And it was lunchtime, they were in Fleet Street, and he said, do you want a quick break? And Viv said, yes, while we're here, Lord, do you want to go into the Cheshire Cheese? Get, a pint of real ale or something. So Viv went in, sat down and ordered jacket potato and a pint of, whatever you've got on the real ale pump there, so fine. At the next table, then, some bemused American tourists arrived. Now, Viv disliked Americans quite a lot, so Viv was rolling his eye. At that moment, his jacket potato and the pint of real ale came. And one of the Americans looked at us and said, "Excuse me, sir." He said, "Could I ask you, we're just new here and visiting London. We're not sure what you British people eat, and, you know, in these pub grubs we see the signs of and lunch." And he said, "Well, why don't you have same as what I'm having? Just have a jacket potato and then a pint of real ale." And so, oh, yeah, if that's the English way, we'll do that. Let's have that. 4 of us, all our jacket potatoes, and what is it? Real ale. Yeah, we'll get this stuff, and they all get pints of real ale, jacket potato. Viv looked at them, and they all stopped, and they just looked down at this stuff. They clearly never experienced jacket potato before, for a start, with all the cheese and butter running out of it. And quick as a flash, they were looking at Viv to see what he was going to do. Picked up the jacket potato with one hand and dipped it into the real ale. Just straight in, then started to nibble at it and talk to the guy from all over. Then, of course, very quickly, "Oh, I think we must get away." And, of course, he walked out of that pub, corpsing with laughter, leaving these American tourists all trying to make the most of it. But that's Viv. We do those things, you see, and you can't say that there's so many people where you thought, "I wish I'd said that," or "I wish I'd done that."
In Big Shot, a journey through the canyons of Viv Stanshall's mind, which was written by Jeremy Pascal and produced by Jane Gibson and John Pidgeon, you heard Philippa Clare, Neil Innes, Pete Moss, Brian Patten, John Peel, Mark Stanshall, John Walters and Steve Winwood, with me, Stephen Fry.
It's that telephone again, and if I'm not mistaken, and I never am, we pre-record all this stuff in case I say something rude. It's Mrs. Nora Later. Hello, Nora. May I call you later?